wife said. I'm moving to Japan to reinvent myself. Don't bother waiting. I responded, good luck. Then I sublet our apartment. Her shock when she came back early to find a new family living in her home. I'm Derek, 34, a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm in Portland, Oregon, and Amanda was my wife of 6 years, a marketing coordinator at a local wellness company who specialized in organic skincare brands. We'd built what I thought was a solid middle-class life together, decent jobs, a nice one-bedroom condo in the Pearl District that I'd bought before we got married, weekend farmers market trips, and those predictable dinner conversations about work stress and weekend plans. Our routine was comfortable, maybe boring to some people, but I liked the stability of knowing we were building something together, even if it wasn't particularly exciting. I handled the finances since I made about 20% more than her, she managed our social calendar since she was better with people, and we split household duties with the efficiency of roommates who'd figured out a system that worked. Amanda had always been the type to get swept up in new interests, hot yoga phases that lasted 3 months, expensive juicing cleanses, weekend pottery classes at the community center that she'd attend religiously for 6 weeks before moving on to something else. I'd learned to nod supportively and budget for whatever equipment or classes caught her attention, figuring everyone needs hobbies and her enthusiasm was part of what I'd fallen for originally. What I didn't realize was that her latest pottery obsession had evolved into something much bigger, something she'd been planning in secret for months while I continued living my normal life, completely oblivious to the fact that my wife was preparing to detonate our marriage. It was a Tuesday evening in March, nothing special about the day. I'd picked up Thai takeout from our usual place, opened a bottle of wine, and we were sitting at our small dining table discussing my latest project timeline when Amanda set down her pad thai and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between determination and cold calculation. Derek, I need to tell you something important, she said, her voice carrying a formality that immediately put me on edge because Amanda never used that tone unless she was about to deliver news that would require damage control. I looked up from my curry, already mentally preparing for whatever crisis had emerged. Maybe her company was doing layoffs, or her sister needed money again, or we discovered some expensive repair issue with the condo that would eat into our vacation fund. I'm moving to Tokyo next month to study traditional ceramics and pottery making with authentic Japanese masters, she announced, speaking in the measured cadence of someone who'd rehearsed this speech multiple times. I've already quit my job, enrolled in a year-long artisan program, and been taking intensive Japanese language classes 3 nights a week since October. The words hit me like a physical blow, each revelation stacking on top of the last until I felt genuinely dizzy trying to process what she was telling me. 6 months of secret planning, major life decisions made without a single conversation, an entire year-long commitment that would destroy everything we'd built together, delivered over takeout like she was announcing a weekend trip to Seattle. You've been planning this for 6 months without mentioning it to your husband, I said slowly, my voice barely above a whisper as the magnitude of her deception started settling in. Don't bother waiting for me to come back, Amanda continued, completely ignoring my reaction and plowing ahead with what was clearly a prepared statement. I need to discover who I am without being tied down to anyone else's expectations or timeline, and I can't do that while I'm worried about maintaining a marriage or living up to someone else's idea of what my life should look like. The casual cruelty of that phrase, "Don't bother waiting," landed with surgical precision, making it crystal clear that this wasn't a sabbatical or temporary separation, but a complete abandonment of our marriage disguised as personal growth. I sat there staring at this woman I'd shared a bed with for 6 years, realizing I was looking at a stranger who'd been plotting her escape while I'd been planning our future, and the only response I could manage was a simple "good luck." Because what else do you say when someone announces they're torching your life for pottery classes? 3 days after Amanda's departure, I was sitting in our eerily quiet condo trying to process what had just happened to my life when I reached for our shared iPad to check my work emails. That's when I discovered Amanda had forgotten to log out of her cloud storage account, and what I found there completely shattered whatever illusions I still had about our marriage and her motivations for this sudden life change. The folder labeled Japan Plans contained months of evidence that this wasn't some spontaneous journey of self-discovery, but a carefully orchestrated escape plan that had been in the works since last October. There were screenshots of video calls with someone named Kenji Nakamura, a ceramics instructor at the Tokyo Art Institute, dating back 8 months, long before she'd ever mentioned pottery or Japan to me. The timestamps showed they'd been talking almost daily, sometimes for hours at a time, usually when I was at work or asleep. I scrolled through message after message, watching their relationship evolve from casual pottery discussions to intimate conversations about their future together, complete with romantic selfies and increasingly personal exchanges that made my stomach turn. "I can't wait to finally be with you properly," read one message from Amanda dated just 2 weeks ago. Derek is completely clueless about what's happening, which makes this so much easier than I expected. Another message thread from January made it clear she'd been planning this exit strategy for months. "The hardest part is pretending everything is normal when I'm already mentally checked out of this marriage. He's financially useful but emotionally vacant, and I need someone who actually understands my creative soul." But the message that truly destroyed me was from March, right around the time she'd started acting distant. "Our marriage has become a convenient prison I'm finally escaping. Derek thinks we're building a life together, but I'm just using the stability to plan my real future with you. He'll probably be relieved when I'm gone anyway. All he cares about is his construction projects and his boring routine." I sat there staring at the screen, reading message after message where Amanda described me as a placeholder, a financial stepping stone, someone whose only value was providing the security she needed while she planned her new life with another man. The woman I'd shared a bed with for 6 years had been conducting a full emotional affair, mocking our marriage, and treating me like some kind of unwitting sponsor for her romantic adventure. There were detailed discussions about how she'd save money for the trip by letting me pay for everything, conversations about how long she'd need to stay in Japan before Kenji could help her get permanent residency, and even jokes about how Derek's probably already planning to turn my craft room into a home office. The level of calculation and contempt was breathtaking. She'd been living a double life for 8 months, letting me believe we were working toward a future together while secretly planning to abandon everything we'd built. What hurt most wasn't just the betrayal itself, but how thoroughly she'd played me, using my love and commitment as tools to fund her exit strategy. I found myself thinking about all those nights she'd seemed distracted, all those times she'd claimed to be at pottery class but was probably video chatting with Kenji, all those moments when I'd sensed something was off but trusted her explanations. As the full scope of her deception became clear, something shifted inside me. The hurt and confusion I'd been carrying for 3 days transformed into something much more useful: cold, calculated determination. Amanda had made her choice months ago, and now it was time for me to make mine. If she wanted to treat our marriage like a business transaction, then I'd handle the dissolution with the same level of strategic thinking she'd used to plan her escape. She'd underestimated me completely, assuming I'd just sit around feeling sorry for myself while she lived out her fantasy in Tokyo. Instead, I was going to protect myself legally and financially, starting with consulting a lawyer first thing Monday morning. Monday morning, I was sitting in the office of Margaret Hutchinson, a family law attorney who came highly recommended and had 23 years of experience dealing with cases exactly like mine. I'd printed out every screenshot from Amanda's cloud storage, organized them chronologically, and brought along our financial records, property documents, and marriage certificate. Margaret reviewed everything with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen this exact scenario dozens of times before, occasionally making notes and asking clarifying questions about timeline and legal details. "Derek, this is actually quite straightforward from a legal perspective," she said, leaning back in her chair with the confidence that comes from expertise. "Your wife has committed what we call constructive abandonment of the marital residence and relationship. She left voluntarily, stated explicitly that you shouldn't wait for her return, and has been absent for over a week with expressed intent to remain gone for a full year." The relief was immediate and overwhelming because I'd been terrified that somehow I'd be legally trapped by her decision to abandon our marriage. "Since you purchased the condominium before your marriage and Amanda contributed nothing to the down payment, renovation costs, or mortgage payments, she has zero ownership claim to the property," Margaret continued, pulling up the deed records on her computer. "Oregon is an equitable distribution state, But when one spouse owns property prior to marriage and the other spouse contributed no financial investment or improvement, that property remains separate property belonging solely to the original owner. Even better, Amanda had already withdrawn her entire share of our joint savings account, almost $8,400 for her Japan adventure, which Margaret explained could be considered her voluntary distribution of marital assets. She essentially took what she wanted and left, Margaret observed. Combined with her documented intent to abandon the marriage and her ongoing emotional affair with this Kenji person, you have grounds for divorce based on abandonment and adultery if needed. But the best part was learning that I had every legal right to sublease the property immediately since Amanda had voluntarily vacated and explicitly stated she wouldn't be returning. You're under no legal obligation to maintain an empty residence for someone who has abandoned both you and the property, Margaret explained. Just document everything, give her belongings reasonable care, and proceed with your life. Within 48 hours, I'd listed our condo for sublease and was amazed by the response. Portland's rental market was absolutely brutal for families, and our one-bedroom unit in the Pearl District with updated appliances and downtown access was exactly what several people desperately needed. The perfect tenants appeared almost immediately. Dr. Patricia Williams, a pediatric surgeon at Oregon Health and Science University, and her husband David, a freelance architect who specialized in sustainable building design. They had twin 8-year-old daughters, Emma and Sophie, and needed temporary housing for 3 to 4 months while their new house underwent extensive renovations after a plumbing disaster that had made it uninhabitable. We've been staying in a hotel for 2 weeks, Patricia explained during our meeting, her exhaustion visible after pulling a 36-hour shift in the pediatric ICU. The girls need stability to start the school year properly, and we need somewhere we can actually cook meals and do laundry. David added that they were happy to pay a premium for short-term furnished housing and had excellent credit, references from previous landlords, and enough savings to cover 6 months' rent upfront. These were exactly the kind of responsible, professional tenants any property owner would dream of having, and their temporary housing needs aligned perfectly with my timeline for divorce proceedings. I spent the weekend methodically packing Amanda's belongings with the kind of systematic approach I used for construction project management. Every item cataloged, photographed, and carefully wrapped before being placed in clearly labeled boxes. Her clothes, her pottery supplies, her decorative nonsense that had cluttered every surface of our minimalist space, her collection of self-help books about manifesting abundance and finding your authentic self, all of it packed with professional care and stored in a climate-controlled facility 10 minutes from the condo. I kept detailed receipts for the storage unit, packing supplies, and my time spent preserving her possessions, because Margaret had emphasized the importance of demonstrating reasonable care for abandoned marital property. The Williams family moved in exactly 2 weeks after Amanda's departure, and the transformation was remarkable. Instead of one angry, entitled woman treating our home like a staging area for her escape plan, I now had a peaceful, respectful family who appreciated having a safe place to stay during their housing transition. Emma and Sophie were polite, curious kids who did their homework at the dining table and asked thoughtful questions about my construction work, while Patricia and David were the kind of adults who cleaned up after themselves, respected property boundaries, and actually improved the atmosphere of the entire building. This is exactly what we needed, Patricia said as she unpacked medical journals and her daughters arranged their stuffed animals on the sofa. Thank you for working with our unusual timeline. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd replaced my selfish, financially parasitic wife with a family that contributed more positivity to my life in 2 weeks than Amanda had managed in 6 years. David turned out to be incredibly interesting to talk to, sharing stories about designing eco-friendly buildings and discussing sustainable construction techniques that were directly relevant to my work, while Patricia had this dry sense of humor that reminded me why I enjoyed intelligent conversation with people who actually listened and responded thoughtfully. For the first time in months, coming home felt genuinely pleasant instead of like walking into an emotional minefield where any conversation might trigger Amanda's latest crisis or demand for funding some new obsession. 3 months into what was supposed to be Amanda's year-long journey of self-discovery in Japan, I was coming home from work on a Thursday evening when I found her standing in the hallway outside our condo building, looking like she'd been crying for hours and clutching two oversized suitcases that had clearly seen better days. My first thought was genuine concern because she looked absolutely destroyed, nothing like the confident woman who'd announced her plans to reinvent herself through pottery and cultural immersion. Her usual perfect makeup was smudged, her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing wrinkled clothes that suggested she'd been traveling for at least 24 hours without sleeping. "Derek, thank God you're here," she said, rushing toward me with obvious relief and desperation. "My key isn't working, and I think there's something wrong with the lock system because I can hear people talking inside our apartment." The way she said, "our apartment," with such automatic ownership made it clear she hadn't processed that anything fundamental had changed during her absence, despite explicitly telling me not to wait for her return. "Amanda, what are you doing here? I thought you were supposed to be in Tokyo until next March, pursuing your authentic ceramic arts education." Her face crumpled completely, and I could see she was fighting back tears as she struggled to find words that wouldn't completely humiliate her. "Kenji turned out to be married with 2 kids, she said quietly, her voice breaking on every word. "He never mentioned that during all our video calls, and when I showed up at the pottery studio, his wife was there working as his assistant. Apparently, he'd been using me for English conversation practice and emotional validation while I thought we were building something real together." The irony was absolutely staggering. She'd destroyed our marriage for a fantasy relationship with a man who'd been lying to her the entire time, exactly the way she'd been lying to me. He told me he never intended for me to actually come to Japan, that he thought I was just playing games online, and that my showing up had caused serious problems in his marriage, Amanda continued, wiping her nose with her sleeve. "I spent 3 weeks in a hostel trying to figure out what to do, but everything is so expensive there, and I don't speak enough Japanese to function properly, and the pottery program was a complete scam designed to take money from naive Americans." I felt a strange mix of vindication and genuine pity watching her realize that her carefully planned escape had been built on completely false assumptions. "I'm sorry that happened to you, but I still don't understand why your key isn't working," I said, though I had a pretty good idea of what she was about to discover. "Can you please just help me get inside? I'm exhausted and I need to process everything that's happened and figure out what to do next." I walked up to the door and used my key, which worked perfectly, but what Amanda saw when the door opened made her stumble backward like she'd been physically struck. Dr. Patricia Williams was helping her daughter Sophie with homework at our dining table while David was cooking dinner in the kitchen, and Emma was watching cartoons on the couch with her legs tucked up comfortably like she belonged there. "Who are these people?" Amanda shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that made everyone in the apartment look up in alarm. "What the hell is going on here? Derek, why are there strangers in our home?" Patricia immediately stood up and moved protectively toward her daughters, clearly recognizing that Amanda was in some kind of crisis but unsure what kind of threat she might represent. "Excuse me, but who are you?" Patricia asked in her calm, professional voice that she probably used when dealing with panicked parents in the pediatric ICU. "I'm Amanda Mitchell, and this is my home," Amanda declared, pushing past me into the living room like she was reclaiming occupied territory. "I don't know who you people are or what kind of scam you're running, but you need to get out of my apartment immediately before I call the police." David stepped out of the kitchen, still holding a spatula, and looked at me with raised eyebrows that clearly asked whether I needed backup dealing with what appeared to be an unhinged person. "Amanda, these are my tenants," I said calmly, using the same measured tone I'd used to explain a construction delay to an angry client. "Dr. Patricia Williams and her family are subleasing the apartment while their house undergoes renovations. They've been living here for 2.5 months. The word, tenants, hit Amanda like a physical blow, and I watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then pure rage as she processed what I was telling her. "Tenants? You rented out our home to strangers without asking me? You abandoned the residence and explicitly told me not to bother waiting for you to come back. I'm protecting my property investment by generating rental income instead of letting it sit empty for a year while you pursued your pottery dreams." Amanda turned to Patricia and David with the kind of entitled fury that suggested she expected them to pack up and leave immediately now that the real owner had returned. "I don't care what arrangement you think you have with my husband, "But this is my home and you're trespassing," she announced. "You have 30 minutes to get your stuff and get out before I call building security." That's when Patricia, who'd probably dealt with plenty of difficult people in her medical career, pulled out her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling building security right now because you're clearly not supposed to be here and you're frightening my children." Emma and Sophie had stopped what they were doing and were staring at Amanda with the kind of wide-eyed fear that kids get when adults start screaming unpredictably. "Ma'am, this is Dr. Williams in Unit 4B, Patricia said into her phone. "We have someone in our apartment claiming to own it and demanding that we leave. She seems agitated and I'm concerned for my daughter's safety." Amanda's face went white as she realized the security guard would have records showing that the Williams family were legitimate tenants and she had no legal standing to be there. "Derek, tell them this is all a misunderstanding," she pleaded, suddenly switching from aggressive to desperate. "Tell them you'll cancel their lease and that we're working things out." "There's nothing to work out, Amanda. You voluntarily abandoned this residence and our marriage. I have documentation proving you vacated the premises with stated intent not to return, and these people have a legal lease agreement." 5 minutes later, building security arrived, followed shortly by 2 Portland police officers who'd been called when the situation escalated. I calmly presented them with copies of my lease agreement with the Williams family, Amanda's text messages about moving to Japan, photos of her voluntarily packing her belongings, and the storage facility receipt showing where her possessions were being properly maintained. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation showing legal claim to this residence?" one officer asked Amanda professionally. She couldn't produce anything because her name wasn't on the deed, the mortgage, or any utility bills. The police escorted her out of the building while she screamed about illegal eviction and threatened to sue everyone involved, but her threats carried no legal weight and everyone knew it. 2 weeks after Amanda's dramatic ejection from the building, I thought the worst was behind me and we could proceed with a straightforward divorce based on abandonment and adultery. That optimistic assumption lasted exactly until I received a certified letter from Kellerman, Walsh & Associates, one of Portland's most expensive family law firms, informing me that I was being sued for $75,000 in damages for emotional trauma, unlawful conversion of marital property, and violation of Amanda's fundamental rights as a spouse. The legal complaint was 23 pages of pure fiction, painting me as a controlling, financially abusive husband who had manipulated Amanda into leaving the country, then illegally evicted her from her marital home while she was pursuing legitimate educational opportunities abroad. According to their version of events, I was a monster who had trapped her in an emotionally vacant marriage, stolen inheritance money she'd contributed to home improvements, and conspired to destroy her life through calculated psychological warfare. The inheritance money claim was particularly creative since Amanda had never received any inheritance and had contributed exactly $0 to any home improvements, but apparently her father's legal team figured they'd throw everything at the wall and see what stuck. What really shocked me was discovering that Amanda's father, Robert Harrison, was financing this entire legal assault. I'd met him maybe 3 times during our 6-year marriage, and he'd always seemed like a reasonable guy who worked in commercial real estate development and lived a comfortable but not extravagant lifestyle. Turns out he was much wealthier than I'd realized and was absolutely furious that his precious daughter had been humiliated by what he saw as a blue-collar nobody who didn't appreciate what he'd been given. The legal strategy became clear when Margaret called me into her office to discuss the situation, her usually calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled anger at what she was reading. "Derek, this is one of the most malicious and baseless lawsuits I've seen in 20 years of practice," she said, spreading the complaint across her desk like evidence of a crime. "They're essentially accusing you of financial abuse for asking your wife to contribute to household expenses, and they're claiming she had ownership rights to property she never legally owned." But the real kicker was the coordinated character assassination campaign that Amanda's family launched simultaneously with the lawsuit. Within days of the legal filing, I started getting phone calls from mutual friends who'd been contacted by Amanda or her family members, all hearing the same carefully crafted story about how I'd been secretly controlling and abusive throughout our marriage. According to their narrative, Amanda had been trapped in an emotionally violent relationship where I used money as a weapon to control her behavior, isolated her from friends and family, and ultimately forced her to flee the country to escape my psychological manipulation. The story was so well constructed that some people who'd known us for years actually started believing it, especially when Amanda's sister started posting carefully edited text message screenshots on social media that made normal conversations about household budgets look like financial abuse. He literally controlled every dollar she spent. Amanda's sister posted along with a screenshot of me asking Amanda to check with me before making a major purchase. Classic abuser behavior, isolating the victim and making them financially dependent. The screenshot conveniently left out the context that the major purchase was a $1,200 pottery wheel she wanted to buy with our joint credit card without discussing it first, and that I'd simply suggested we talk about large expenses together like normal married couples do. But the most serious escalation came when Amanda filed a restraining order petition claiming I had a history of domestic violence and had threatened her physical safety during our confrontation at the condo. The filing included dramatic claims about feeling genuinely afraid for her life when I'd calmly explained her legal status to the police and described me as having anger management issues and controlling tendencies that made her fear for her safety. The domestic violence accusations were completely fabricated, but they served a strategic purpose. If granted, the restraining order would force me out of my own condo and potentially freeze my assets while the bogus lawsuit proceeded. Amanda's legal team was essentially trying to use false abuse allegations as leverage to force a settlement, betting that I'd rather pay them money than fight false charges that could destroy my professional reputation. The harassment campaign extended to my workplace when Amanda's father started calling my firm's partners claiming that I was under investigation for domestic violence and financial fraud, suggesting that employing me posed a liability risk to their business. He somehow got the personal contact information for 3 of our major clients and sent them carefully worded letters expressing concern about my personal legal troubles and whether they felt comfortable having their investments managed by someone facing serious accusations. The psychological pressure was intense and obviously calculated. They were trying to make fighting the lawsuit so professionally and financially destructive that I'd be forced to settle just to make it stop, even though their claims were completely baseless. But Amanda's team had made one critical error in their strategy. They'd underestimated how thoroughly her own digital evidence would destroy their carefully constructed narrative. Margaret scheduled an emergency meeting with Kellerman, Walsh, and Associates to present them with something their client apparently hadn't warned them about: months of Amanda's own text messages, emails, and cloud storage documents that completely contradicted every single claim in their lawsuit. Your client called my client her financial safety net and explicitly stated she was using their marriage for financial stability while pursuing a romantic relationship with another man, Margaret announced, sliding printed copies of Amanda's messages across the conference table. She documented her own plan to abandon the marriage and described their relationship as a convenient prison she was finally escaping. The lead attorney's face went pale as he reviewed Amanda's own words describing me as financially useful but emotionally vacant, and her detailed discussions with Kenji about how she was manipulating me to fund her escape plan. Her own messages completely destroyed any claim of emotional abuse or financial control. Instead, they revealed someone who was systematically exploiting their spouse's love and trust for personal gain. But the most damaging evidence was Amanda's admission that she'd withdrawn money from our joint account specifically to fund her affair, her jokes about how Derek's probably already planning to turn my craft room into a home office, and her detailed timeline showing she'd been planning to abandon our marriage for 8 months while pretending to work on our future together. Furthermore, Margaret continued, clearly enjoying herself, my client has documentation proving your client voluntarily vacated the marital residence with explicit instructions not to wait for her return, making any claim of illegal eviction absolutely frivolous. The meeting ended with Amanda's lawyers requesting a recess to reassess their client's recollection of events, which was legal speak for, holy shit, our client lied to us about everything and now we're facing potential sanctions for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Margaret came back to the office energized like a prosecutor who just caught a defendant perjuring themselves on the witness stand. Derek, we're not just going to defeat this lawsuit, she announced. We're going to make them regret they ever filed it. Amanda's own evidence gives us grounds for a comprehensive countersuit that's going to cost her family significantly more than they're demanding from you. Margaret and I spent the next 2 weeks crafting what she called a legal masterpiece of righteous fury, a comprehensive countersuit demanding $125,000 in damages for fraud, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and abuse of legal process. The filing was 47 pages of methodically documented evidence showing how Amanda had systematically deceived me, financially exploited our marriage, and then orchestrated a malicious campaign of false accusations when her plan backfired. We had screenshots of every message where Amanda called me her financial safety net, detailed timelines of her 8-month affair with Kenji, and documentation of her explicit statement that she was abandoning our marriage permanently. Your wife handed us a gift when she documented her own fraud, Margaret explained as we reviewed the final draft. Most people don't get this kind of smoking gun evidence in emotional distress cases. The centerpiece of our countersuit was Amanda's own digital confession where she described using me as financially useful but emotionally vacant while planning her escape to Japan with another man. We included her jokes about how I'd probably redecorate her craft room, her calculations about how much money she could save by letting me pay for everything while she funded her affair, and her admission that our marriage was a convenient prison she was exploiting for personal gain. But we didn't stop there. We went after her father's witness intimidation tactics and documented every attempt he'd made to pressure my employer and clients with false allegations. Robert Williams contacted 3 of your professional clients with defamatory statements suggesting you were under criminal investigation, our filing stated. This constitutes intentional interference with business relationships and warrants substantial punitive damages. The harassment at my workplace had caused measurable financial damage when 2 clients temporarily suspended their accounts pending resolution of my personal legal issues, costing me approximately $8,000 in commission income that quarter. We demanded full reimbursement plus additional damages for the professional reputation harm that would take years to fully repair. Amanda's false domestic violence accusations became the most expensive part of her legal strategy because Oregon has strict penalties for knowingly false allegations in protection order proceedings. Our countersuit included a separate count for malicious prosecution, supported by her own text messages to friends admitting she'd never been afraid of me but was using the legal system to make Derek's life as complicated and expensive as possible until he agrees to give me what I deserve. The most satisfying part was exposing how Amanda's legal team had filed their original lawsuit without conducting basic due diligence about their client's credibility. We presented evidence that Amanda had lied to her own attorneys about key facts, including claiming she'd contributed to the condo's down payment and had been forced to leave against her will. Plaintiffs' counsel filed frivolous claims based on their client's false representations, our response stated. This abuse of legal process has caused substantial harm and warrants sanctions under Oregon's frivolous litigation statute. When Kellerman, Walsh and Associates received our countersuit, the lead attorney called Margaret within hours requesting an emergency meeting. The confidence they displayed during their original aggressive negotiations had completely evaporated, replaced by the kind of panic that comes from realizing you've walked into a legal trap with overwhelming evidence stacked against you. They're offering to withdraw their lawsuit entirely if you'll agree not to pursue your countersuit, Margaret reported after their phone call. I told them we'd consider dismissing our claim for attorney fees if Amanda agrees to pay them voluntarily, signs a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement, and stipulates to an uncontested divorce with no alimony. The beauty of our position was that Amanda's own evidence made our case virtually bulletproof while completely destroying any sympathy she might have generated. Every message she'd sent mocking our marriage, every calculation about exploiting my financial support, every joke about deceiving me became ammunition we could use to prove her malicious intent. Her father's attempts at witness intimidation only strengthened our case for punitive damages and showed a pattern of harassment that extended beyond Amanda's individual actions. This is what happens when entitled people assume everyone else is too stupid or weak to fight back, Margaret observed as we prepared for what would likely be Amanda's legal team's surrender. They got so confident in their victim narrative that they forgot to cover their tracks. The final nail in their coffin came when we subpoenaed Amanda's phone records and discovered she'd been coordinating with her sister to create fake text message screenshots for social media, including editing timestamps and deleting her own responses to make normal conversations look abusive. Her digital manipulation was so extensive that we had grounds to pursue additional charges for fraud and evidence tampering, which would have turned a civil matter into potential criminal liability. Amanda's overconfident legal team had walked straight into the most well-documented case of litigation abuse Margaret had seen in her career, and now they were facing the very real possibility that their client might end up owing more in damages and sanctions than she'd originally demanded from me. 6 months after this legal nightmare began, Amanda's family finally waved the white flag and approached Margaret about negotiating a comprehensive settlement. Facing potential criminal charges for evidence tampering, mounting legal fees that had already exceeded $40,000, and the very real possibility of owing me substantial damages, Robert Harrison decided that cutting his losses was better than continuing a fight they absolutely could not win. The settlement negotiations took place in a downtown Portland conference room where Amanda sat between two lawyers looking like she'd aged 5 years in 6 months, her usual confidence replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who'd finally realized that actions have consequences. She agreed to relinquish all claims to my condominium, acknowledge that she had no ownership rights to any of my premarital property, and accept full responsibility for both sides' legal costs, which totaled just over $28,000. More importantly, she signed a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that prevented her from discussing our marriage, the divorce proceedings, or any aspect of our relationship in any public forum, including social media, effectively ending her ability to continue spreading lies about me to mutual friends or professional contacts. The divorce was finalized exactly 8 months after Amanda's dramatic announcement about reinventing herself in Japan, with no alimony obligations on either side and a court order confirming my sole ownership of all property I'd acquired before our marriage. As part of the settlement, I received a cash payment of $35,000 to compensate for my lost wages, damaged professional reputation, and emotional distress caused by her false accusations and harassment campaign. Amanda moved back into her childhood bedroom at her parents' house in Beaverton, a 34-year-old woman whose grand adventure in self-discovery had ended with her living under her father's roof again while working part-time at a local pottery studio for $15 an hour. The irony that she'd ended up doing the same pottery work she could have pursued locally, but now as a divorced woman with damaged credit and limited career prospects, wasn't lost on anyone who knew the real story. Meanwhile, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined when Amanda first announced her Japan plans. I received a promotion to senior project manager at work, largely because my handling of the legal crisis had demonstrated the kind of calm problem-solving skills and attention to detail that my bosses valued in high-pressure situations. My salary increased by 18%, and I was given oversight of our firm's largest commercial development project, a mixed-use complex that would be the most significant undertaking of my career so far. The Williams family had completed their home renovations and moved out of my condo in May, but Patricia and I had started spending time together outside of our landlord-tenant relationship. She was everything Amanda wasn't: intellectually curious, financially independent, emotionally mature, and genuinely interested in building something meaningful with someone who shared her values. Our first official date was at a downtown restaurant where we talked for 3 hours about everything from sustainable architecture to pediatric surgery techniques, and I realized I hadn't had a conversation that intellectually stimulating in years. We took things slowly because both of us understood the importance of building a relationship on genuine compatibility rather than physical attraction or convenience. But by fall we were spending most weekends together, either exploring Portland's parks and scenic paths or cooking elaborate meals while her daughters did homework at my dining table. Patricia made more money than I did and insisted on splitting expenses equally, a refreshing change from Amanda's assumption that I'd handle all financial responsibilities while she pursued her various creative phases. I used the settlement money to open an investment account with a diversified portfolio of index funds and blue-chip stocks, something I'd always wanted to do but couldn't afford while supporting Amanda's lifestyle and her constant series of expensive hobbies. Having that financial cushion for the first time in my adult life felt like genuine security, The kind of peace of mind that comes from knowing you're building wealth instead of just funding someone else's irresponsible spending. Looking back now, almost a year after Amanda's announcement changed everything, I can honestly say that her betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it felt like the end of the world at the time. She'd been right about one thing: our marriage had become a prison, but I was the one who'd been trapped, not her. I'd been so focused on maintaining stability and meeting her endless needs that I'd stopped growing as a person, stopped pursuing my own interests, and stopped believing I deserved a partner who actually valued what I brought to the relationship. Amanda's calculated abandonment forced me to rebuild my life from scratch, but this time I built it according to my own values and priorities instead of trying to accommodate someone who saw me as nothing more than a financial resource. The woman who'd planned to reinvent herself through pottery and international adventure had ended up back where she started, just older and more bitter, while the man she dismissed as emotionally vacant had discovered what genuine happiness and partnership actually looked like.